there is a particular kind of loneliness that no one talks about, not because it is rare, but because it is almost impossible to explain without sounding ungrateful. It is the loneliness you feel in the presence of someone who loves you, the loneliness of being held and still feeling unreachable, of being chosen and still feeling unknown. If you have ever sat across a dinner table from someone who cares for you deeply and felt, despite everything, a quiet and aching distance, this is for you. We tend to think of loneliness as a problem of quantity, that lonely people are simply people with too few others around them. We picture someone eating alone, or scrolling through a phone in an empty apartment, or sitting on a bench in winter with no one to call. We imagine loneliness as an empty room, but there is another kind, and it may be far more common. It is the loneliness that lives inside a full life, inside a relationship, inside a family, inside a circle of friends who genuinely love you. It is the sense that even among people who would do anything for you, something essential about you has never quite been seen, never quite been touched, never quite been understood. This is not a loneliness born from abandonment. It is born from something more subtle and in many ways more painful. The gap between being loved and being known. These are not the same thing. To be loved is to be valued, to be wanted, to be cared for, to have someone worry when you are unwell and smile when you walk into a room. And love, in its most common form, is a kind of loyalty. It says, I choose you, I will stay, I will be here. But to be known is something different. To be known is to have the specific texture of your inner world, recognized, your particular fears, your strange private logic, the things that hurt you in ways you cannot always explain, the dreams you have half abandoned, the version of yourself you have never quite managed to show anyone. To be known is to have someone sit with the parts of you that are not easy and remain. Most people in our lives love us sincerely. And yet most of us walk around carrying the quiet suspicion that if they truly knew us fully, without the editing, without the performance, they might love us a little less. So we curate ourselves. We soften our edges. We offer the version most likely to be received well. We laugh when we are supposed to laugh. We say, I'm fine when we are not fine. And gradually, almost without noticing, we become lonely in the middle of love because the person being loved is not entirely us. There is a philosopher named Martin Buber who wrote about two different kinds of human encounter. He called them the I-it relationship and the I-thou relationship. In an I-it encounter, we relate to another person as though they were an object in our world, useful, familiar, categorizable, someone who fits a role, a partner, a friend, a parent. We know what they do for us. We know how they behave, but we do not know them as a mystery, as a full and irreducible subject with their own infinite interior life. The I-thou encounter is rarer and more difficult. It is the moment when two people meet not as roles, but as presences. When someone sees you not as a category, not as my partner or my colleague or the funny one in the group, but as a self, fully, strangely, uncomfortably real. Buber believed that genuine human connection could only happen in these I-thou moments. And he also believed with a sadness that feels very modern that such moments are brief, fragile, and difficult to sustain. Most of our relationships, even our closest ones, are largely I-it. Not because we are cold or careless, but because sustaining genuine presence with another human being is exhausting and demanding. It requires that we put down our own needs long enough to truly attend, that we resist the urge to interpret, to fix, to redirect, that we sit in uncertainty without rushing toward resolution. This is not laziness. It is simply the ordinary limitation of being human. And so we love each other faithfully, and we miss each other entirely. Modern life has made this worse in ways that are not always obvious. We live in a culture that rewards self-presentation. Social media, professional networking, even ordinary social interaction has taught us to think of ourselves as brands, to lead with our strengths, to manage our image, to always be slightly more composed than we actually are. We have become skilled at showing people the version of us that works, the version that is productive and pleasant and does not require too much from anyone. But the self we perform in public is not the self that aches at 3 a.m. It is not the self that is still grieving something from 10 years ago. It is not the self that quietly doubts whether it deserves any of this. And when the people who love us can only see the performed version, because that is the only version we have learned, to show a particular kind of hollow loneliness sets in, we begin to wonder, do they love me, or do they love the person I pretend to be? This is one of the central anxieties of modern emotional life. Not whether we will be loved, but whether we would still be loved if we stopped pretending. Whether the love we receive is conditional on the maintenance of a self we are already exhausted by performing. There is also something to be said about the loneliness that comes from not having language for what we feel. Some of the most isolating experiences in life are not dramatic. They are quiet, accumulative, hard to name, the sense of living slightly beside yourself, the feeling that you are always preparing for your life rather than living it, the particular sadness of Sunday evenings, the way a certain song can make you cry and you cannot explain why, the impression that everyone else has somehow been given instructions for how to be a person and you miss the meeting. These things are real, they are significant, but they are difficult to bring into conversation, especially with people who love us and are understandably invested in our happiness. To tell someone who loves you that you still feel in some essential way alone is to risk frightening them, to risk being misunderstood, to risk being offered a solution when what you needed was simply to be heard. And so we stay quiet, and the silence becomes its own form of distance. What is perhaps most quietly devastating about this kind of loneliness is how invisible it is, not just to others, but to ourselves. We live in an age that has given us more tools for connection than any generation before us. We can reach anyone, anywhere, instantly. We carry our relationships in our pockets. And yet, surveys consistently show that rates of loneliness are rising, particularly among young adults, and particularly among those who would describe themselves by any external measure as socially connected. This is not a paradox if you understand the difference between contact and connection. We have maximized contact, we are in constant communication, but communication by itself does not produce the felt sense of being known. You can send 100 messages a day to someone and still feel profoundly unseen by them. You can be surrounded by people who would describe you as a close friend and still carry something inside you that has never been shared with anyone. The problem is not that we are isolated. The problem is that our connections, however numerous, are often not deep enough to reach the parts of us that most need to be touched. There is a kind of love, and perhaps it is the only kind, that truly answers loneliness, that does not require us to be well. That does not depend on our being cheerful or together or easy. A love that can sit with our confusion and our sadness and our contradictions, without needing to resolve them. That does not say, you'll be fine, when what we need is for someone to say, I know this is hard. Most of us have received very little of this kind of love, not because we are unloved, but because it is genuinely rare. It requires a kind of emotional courage and patience that even the most loving people often do not possess, not out of cruelty, but out of their own unhealed need to feel useful, to see those they love become okay again. And so we forgive them, and we carry our loneliness quietly, and we go on loving each other in the imperfect ways we know how. But here is something worth sitting with. The loneliness we feel is not, in the end, entirely about other people. Part of it, perhaps a large part, is the distance we have placed between ourselves and our own interior. The parts of ourselves we have never properly visited. The emotions we have labeled inconvenient and placed in storage. The needs we decided were too much to ask for. The truths about ourselves that we have been too afraid to hold in the light. We cannot be fully known by others until we are willing to know ourselves. And most of us are strangers to our own depths. We move quickly, we stay busy, we fill the silences that might otherwise ask us difficult questions. We have become so practiced at outrunning ourselves that we no longer know who we would meet if we stopped. The work of ending or at least softening this deeper loneliness may begin not with finding someone who understands us, but with becoming willing to understand ourselves, to sit slowly and without judgment with the particular person we have been all along, to ask, what is it that I am actually feeling? Not what should I be feeling given my circumstances, not what would be appropriate or what would be easy to explain, but what is true, what has always been true. What have I been too afraid to name? There is no simple cure for the kind of loneliness we have been describing. It is not solved by finding the right person or having more conversations or being more vulnerable. These things help. But the hunger that lives at the root of it is older and deeper than any relationship can entirely reach. What we are searching for, perhaps, is what we were hoping for long before we knew how to ask for it. To be seen fully, without condition. To have someone sit with all that we are, the parts we are proud of and the parts we are ashamed of, and say, I see you. I am not frightened. I am not leaving. Most of us will spend our whole lives moving toward this, offering pieces of ourselves, testing the water, retreating when we feel exposed, learning slowly and imperfectly how to be a little more present, how to ask a little more honestly, how to receive love without immediately suspecting it. And perhaps that is enough, not to solve the loneliness, but to carry it more gently, to stop treating it as evidence of failure and start treating it as evidence of depth, of a self complex enough and tender enough and real enough to long for more than surface contact. The loneliness you feel is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a sign that you understand better than most what it means to be human, to need not just to be near someone, but to be known by them, to be reached, to finally, quietly be found.